She walked on the plane dressed in confidence, calm, graceful, and ready for another business trip. But before she could even sit down, a white woman glared at her and snapped, "That's my seat. You must be in the wrong place." Everyone froze. The flight attendant looked nervous. The black woman simply smiled and said, "I think you'll want to check again." The argument got tense. Whispers filled the cabin. The woman refused to move, convinced she belonged there more than the stranger standing beside her. But then, moments later, the captain's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome aboard the founder and CEO of Skyjet Airlines, Ms. Ava Thompson." The entire plane went silent, and the woman who had stolen her seat turned pale, because the person she just insulted didn't just buy a ticket, she built the entire airline. Welcome to BrainFuel, where real stories spark real change. Here, every tale reminds you that kindness is strength, that grace can defeat hate, and that success is built from struggle, not status. If you believe in stories that open hearts and open minds, hit subscribe and fuel your brain with inspiration every single day. "Excuse me, that's my seat." The voice was calm but carried a weight that made a few nearby passengers glance up. The woman who spoke stood tall in a navy blue business suit, her curly hair neatly tied back, and a small gold pin on her lapel glimmered under the cabin lights. Her name was Ava Thompson, and in a few seconds, she was about to witness one of those moments that reveal more about people than words ever could. Sitting in her seat was another woman, Catherine Miller, blonde, immaculately dressed, expensive perfume filling the air. She looked up from her phone and frowned, her manicured hand resting on the armrest of seat 1A, the first-class window seat. "I think you're mistaken," Catherine said without looking properly at Ava. "This is my seat." Ava's expression didn't change. "I don't think so," she said softly, holding up her boarding pass. "1A, that's what my ticket says." Catherine gave a short laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be friendly. "Honey, maybe check again. This seat costs more than most people make in a month. You probably mixed it up." The people nearby shifted uncomfortably. A businessman pretending to read his newspaper lowered it just a little to see what was happening. A young couple whispered to each other. The flight attendant, standing by the galley door, froze for a second. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. Ava smiled slightly, not out of amusement, but because she'd seen this scene before. Different people, different places, same assumptions. "I'm sure this is my seat," she repeated, her voice steady as a stone. The flight attendant approached quickly, trying to ease the tension. "Ma'am, let me check both of your boarding passes." Ava handed hers over first, neat printed, with her name clearly visible, Ms. Ava Thompson, 1A. Then Catherine passed hers reluctantly. The attendant scanned both tickets, looked back and forth, and finally said, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Turning to Catherine, "Seat 1A belongs to Ms. Thompson. You're in 1B. Catherine blinked. "That's impossible," she said sharply. "I booked the window seat weeks ago." "I understand," the attendant said kindly, "but according to the system, this is her seat." Ava nodded politely, expecting Catherine to stand up, but instead, Catherine crossed her arms. "Can't she just take another seat? There are plenty in first class. I'm already settled." The attendant hesitated, glancing at Ava, unsure what to do. Ava's expression didn't flicker. Her patience was quiet but unshakable. "It's all right," she said, her tone calm as ever. "I'll wait." That only seemed to annoy Catherine even more. "See? She's fine waiting," she said, turning back to her phone. "You can move her somewhere else." The flight attendant's face flushed red. I'll see what I can do," she murmured before walking away. Ava stood silently in the aisle, passengers now openly staring. Some looked sympathetic. Others avoided eye contact. In first class, things like this weren't supposed to happen, at least not publicly. But here it was, unfolding like a slow-motion movie. After a minute, Catherine leaned back in her seat and muttered, just loud enough for Ava to hear, "People like you should be grateful to even be flying up here." Ava's heart tightened, but her expression stayed composed. "People like you." She'd heard those words before, when she was a student applying for scholarships, when she pitched her first business idea, even when she bought her first plane. They always sounded the same: sharp, ignorant, and small. The flight attendant returned, looking nervous. "Miss Thompson, I can offer you another seat in 1C if you prefer." "Thank you," Ava said gently, "but I'd rather stay in the seat I paid for." Catherine rolled her eyes. Unbelievable. Ava looked out the window, watching the crew prepare the aircraft for takeoff. Inside, she felt something shift, not anger, but something deeper. A sadness that people still saw color before character, still saw status before kindness. But Ava wasn't a woman who let the smallness of others shrink her spirit. She adjusted her blazer, straightened her posture, and waited. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, cheerful and professional. "Good afternoon, folks. Welcome aboard Skyjet Flight 405 to San Francisco. We're expecting a smooth flight today. Please take your seats so we can depart on time." The flight attendant leaned toward Catherine again. "Ma'am, we really do need to close the cabin door. Please move to your assigned seat." For the first time, a hint of embarrassment crossed Catherine's face. "Fine," she said sharply, grabbing her handbag. "But this is ridiculous." She stood, brushing past Ava without looking at her, and dropped heavily into seat 1B. Ava quietly took her place in 1A. The tension didn't vanish. It simply settled into the air like dust. Catherine pulled out her laptop and started typing furiously. Ava buckled her seatbelt, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a slow breath. To everyone around her, she looked like any other calm business traveler. No one knew that the plane they were sitting in, the logo printed on every headrest, and even the airline itself existed because of her. She was Ava Thompson, the founder and CEO of Skyjet Airlines, but she wasn't going to announce it. Not yet. For Ava, dignity was more powerful than pride. She didn't need to shout who she was. She preferred to let people show her who they were first. As the plane began to taxi, she opened her notebook and jotted a few ideas. Notes for a leadership talk she was giving next week. On top of the page, she wrote one line that always guided her. "Power is not how loud you speak, but how calmly you stand when others doubt you." The engines roared, and the plane lifted into the sky. The city lights faded beneath the clouds. Ava leaned back in her seat, her reflection faintly visible in the window. She thought of her journey, growing up in a small neighborhood where planes were things you watched, not things you owned. She remembered working late nights, studying business, pitching ideas to investors who smiled politely but never believed in her. Every no had built her strength. Every dismissal had sharpened her resolve. And every people like you had pushed her harder to become someone they couldn't ignore. Now, here she was, in her rightful seat on her own airline, and still, someone had tried to take that from her because of what she looked like. Ava smiled faintly. Life had a funny way of setting the stage for lessons. Sometimes, the universe put arrogance right next to grace just to show the difference. She didn't know yet that this small, uncomfortable encounter would soon become a viral story across the world. But for now, Ava just sat quietly, sipping water, while a woman 1 seat away kept pretending not to feel the weight of her own mistake. And somewhere inside, Ava knew the sky is room for everyone, but not everyone knows how to rise. The plane climbed higher, slicing through layers of white clouds as sunlight poured through the window beside Ava. She adjusted her seat and exhaled quietly. The air was calm again, but only on the surface. Inside, the energy between the two women still pulsed, awkward, heavy, and unspoken. Ava took a sip of water and opened her laptop. A screensaver flashed across the screen, a logo that said Skyjet Airlines in silver and blue letters. Catherine noticed the screen from the corner of her eye, but didn't think much of it. She was too busy composing a frustrated email, typing so fast her nails clicked against the keyboard like small sparks. She mumbled under her breath, "First-class service isn't what it used to be." The words drifted into the air, sharp enough for Ava to hear, but Ava ignored them. She was used to that tone, the tone of people who believed courtesy was only for those they approved of. A flight attendant came over, smiling warmly. "Miss Thompson, would you like your usual drink order?" Catherine's fingers froze on the keyboard. She glanced up. Usual, she repeated, her tone puzzled. Ava smiled. Yes, please. Ginger tea, no sugar. Of course, the attendant replied, her voice filled with a kind of respect that didn't come from obligation. It came from genuine admiration. Catherine blinked. Her usual order? That phrase echoed in her head. She looked back at Ava, studying her more closely this time. The woman's calm posture, her confident presence, her elegant simplicity. Something about her didn't match the assumptions Catherine had made earlier. Ava closed her laptop and leaned back in her seat, gazing out the window. She didn't need to say anything to command respect. Her silence carried its own authority. 15 minutes later, the captain's voice came through the speakers. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reynolds, welcoming you aboard Skyjet Airlines, founded by Ms. Ava Thompson, who happens to be flying with us today. It's always an honor when the boss joins a crew. The cabin went silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade for a second. Catherine froze. Her eyes widened, her breath caught halfway in her throat. Slowly, she turned her head toward Ava, who was now smiling politely. I'm sorry, did he say, Catherine stammered, founded? Ava nodded softly. Yes, I built this airline. Catherine's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The same hands that had arrogantly guarded seat 1A just an hour ago now trembled slightly as she clutched her cup. You own Skyjet? She asked, disbelief flooding her voice. I do, Ava said, her tone gentle but firm. Started about 10 years ago. It was just one plane back then, a small charter for business travelers. We've grown since then. Catherine blinked rapidly, trying to process everything. I didn't know, she whispered. Ava tilted her head slightly. You didn't need to know. I'm just another passenger today. Catherine's face burned with embarrassment. I'm so sorry for how I acted earlier. I didn't mean... Ava raised a hand slightly. It's okay. I've been in your shoes before. Catherine looked confused. In my shoes? Yes, Ava said. Once upon a time, I also judged people too quickly. Not by what they were, but by what I thought they were. But life has a way of humbling us until we start seeing people for who they really are. The words sank deep into the air between them. Catherine sat quietly, unable to look away from Ava. She realized this woman had every right to humiliate her in return, to use her power to make her feel small. But she didn't. Ava's calmness wasn't weakness. It was strength in its purest form. The flight attendant returned with Ava's tea, her movements filled with quiet respect. Here you go, Miss Thompson. The crew wanted to say thank you for everything you've done for us. Ava smiled kindly. Tell them I'm proud of them. They make Skyjet what it is. Catherine's guilt twisted even deeper. She had insulted a woman who treated her employees with dignity, who built an entire company from the ground up, and who was respected not because of money, but because of grace. She looked down at her coffee, suddenly ashamed to even sip it. Ms. Thompson, she said softly, I really didn't mean to treat you like that. You just assumed, Ava finished gently. It happens. But assumptions cost more than you think. They cost respect. Catherine nodded slowly. You're right. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. It wasn't about the seat. It was about how I saw you. Ava smiled faintly. The world changes when people admit that. The rest of the flight unfolded quietly. The attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, serving meals and drinks. But now everyone seemed more alert, more aware that they were sitting beside a woman who had built something from nothing. Catherine couldn't stop glancing toward Ava, 1,000 thoughts swirling in her mind. She wanted to say more, to ask how she'd done it, how she climbed from wherever she started to here, above the clouds, literally flying on her own success. Finally, she found the courage. Miss Thompson, may I ask you something? Ava closed her laptop again and turned toward her. Of course. How did you do it? I mean, build something this big. You make it look effortless. Ava chuckled softly. Effortless? No, it was anything but that. I started with rejection after rejection. Banks laughed at my business plans. Investors told me no one would trust a black woman to run an airline. I used to cry in parking lots after meetings. But I didn't stop. Every time they said no, I found another way. Catherine listened, her heart tightening. You must have felt angry sometimes. Angry, yes, Ava said, but anger only takes you halfway. The rest is discipline, focus, and faith. I promised myself that when I succeeded, I'd make sure others like me had a chance too. That's why we have scholarship programs, mentorships, and community flights for underprivileged students. I want them to see that the sky isn't the limit. It's just the beginning. For the first time since boarding, Catherine smiled, not with arrogance, but with admiration. You're incredible. Ava shook her head gently. No, just determined. Catherine leaned back in her seat, staring out the window. The clouds rolled endlessly beneath them, soft and glowing in the afternoon sun. She felt something shift inside her, a realization that had nothing to do with airplanes or luxury seats. It was about respect, about humility. She looked back at Ava one more time and said quietly, "Thank you for not embarrassing me. You could have. You had every reason to." Ava met her eyes and smiled. That's not how change begins. It begins with understanding. Catherine nodded slowly. You just changed mine. As the captain's voice came on again, announcing they were halfway to San Francisco, the cabin seemed to feel lighter, as if some invisible weight had lifted. Ava sipped her tea, closed her eyes, and rested her head back. Catherine sat quietly beside her, humble, thoughtful, and deeply aware that sometimes the biggest lessons don't come from lectures. They come from a single moment when your assumptions crash head-on with the truth. At 30,000 feet above the earth, two women from different worlds shared something powerful. Silence, respect, and a lesson that neither would ever forget. The plane began its slow descent toward San Francisco. Through the window, the city lights twinkled beneath the soft glow of the sunset, painting the horizon gold and red. Passengers stretched, checked their phones, and packed their belongings. The usual end-of-flight chaos. But for two women in the first row, something had changed that went far deeper than the flight itself. Catherine had barely spoken in the last hour. She sat quietly, reflecting on every word Ava had said. Her earlier arrogance now felt like a heavy coat she couldn't wait to take off. The shame still burned inside her, but it was mixed with admiration and something new, respect. When the fasten seatbelt sign blinked on, Ava closed her laptop and tucked it away. The flight attendant approached one last time, smiling warmly. "Thank you for flying with us, Ms. Thompson. It's always an honor having you on board." Ava smiled back. "The honor's mine. You all make Skyjet what it is." Catherine's eyes followed her every move. The way she spoke to people, her warmth, her effortless calm. She had expected power to look loud, bossy, and dominant. But here it was quiet, kind, and humble. The landing gear lowered with a low rumble. The captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be touching down shortly. Thank you for choosing Skyjet Airlines, and we hope to see you again soon." Ava gazed out the window as the plane touched down smoothly on the runway. A soft smile formed on her face. Every landing reminded her how far she had come, from watching planes take off as a little girl in Detroit to now owning a fleet of them. She thought about her mother's words. "Keep your head high, baby. Someday they'll have to look up to see you." As the plane taxied to the gate, Catherine finally spoke. Her voice was small but sincere. "Miss Thompson, I want to thank you." Ava turned to her gently. "For what?" "For teaching me something I didn't know I needed to learn," Catherine said. "You didn't have to be kind to me. I don't even deserve your kindness after what I said. But you showed me what real strength looks like." Ava nodded. "We all learn at our own pace, Catherine. The only real mistake is not learning at all." When the plane stopped and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began standing up, grabbing their luggage from the overhead bins. Ava remained seated for a moment, giving space for others to move. She wasn't in a rush. She never was. She learned long ago that true power doesn't need to push to be seen. Catherine hesitated, clutching her bag. Then she turned toward Ava one last time. "I hope someday I can carry myself the way you do," she said quietly. Ava smiled softly. You can. Just start by treating people with the same respect you want to receive. The rest will follow. Catherine nodded, her eyes glistening. Thank you, she whispered before walking away, her head lowered, but this time not in shame, in humility. As Ava stood and gathered her things, several passengers nearby smiled and nodded to her, some whispering words of respect. A man in the second row said, "Ma'am, I saw what happened earlier. You handled that with grace. I don't think I could have done it." Ava smiled politely. "Thank you. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words." She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking softly against the aisle floor. The cabin door opened, and a burst of cool airport air rushed in. The captain was standing there, waiting. "Ms. Thompson," he said with a grin, "always a pleasure flying with you." "The pleasure's mine, Captain," Ava replied. "Thank you for the smooth landing." As she stepped out, she didn't realize that one of the passengers, the man sitting across from her earlier, had recorded part of the encounter on his phone. Not the argument itself, but the moment when the captain announced who Ava was and Catherine's shocked reaction. He hadn't meant to expose anyone. He just wanted to capture what he called the calmest power move I've ever seen. But within hours, that short clip would explode across social media. The caption read, "White woman refuses to move seats until she finds out the black woman she insulted owns the airline." The video spread like wildfire. Millions of views poured in overnight. Comment sections flooded with praise for Ava's grace and dignity. People called her an inspiration, a role model, a reminder that real power doesn't need to shout. It simply shows up. A few days later, major news outlets picked up the story. They called it the flight that changed two lives. Reporters reached out for comments, but Ava, as always, stayed humble. When asked why she hadn't responded harshly, she said simply, "Because the goal isn't to win arguments. It's to open eyes." Catherine, on the other hand, did something no one expected. She released a public statement. In it, she wrote, "I want to sincerely apologize to Ms. Ava Thompson for how I treated her on that flight. My actions came from ignorance, not hate, but ignorance is still dangerous. That day, I learned that dignity has no color and class has no price tag. I'm grateful she showed me that." Her apology went viral too, and instead of backlash, she received messages of encouragement. People admired her honesty. A week later, Ava was invited to speak at a leadership conference in Los Angeles. The hall was packed with hundreds of young entrepreneurs, dreamers, and professionals eager to hear her words. She walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. Her smile was calm, her voice steady. "I didn't come here to talk about airlines," she began. "I came to talk about altitude, not the kind measured in feet, but in character. You see, life will always have turbulence. People will doubt you, insult you, underestimate you. The question is, will you drop to their level or rise above it?" The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. "The woman on that flight didn't know who I was," Ava continued. "And that's okay, because who I am doesn't change with other people's opinions. My worth doesn't shrink when someone fails to see it." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Ava paused, letting her next words sink in. You don't have to fight every battle with anger. Sometimes the strongest move is patience. Sometimes the loudest voice is silence. And sometimes the greatest revenge is success. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. People stood and cheered, not just for her story, but for what it represented. Dignity over ego, grace over rage, and a quiet, unstoppable power of believing in yourself. Later, as Ava left the stage, a young woman approached her, eyes shining with tears. "Ms. Thompson, you don't know me," she said, "but after hearing your story, I'm going to apply for that aviation scholarship your company offers. I want to be like you one day." Ava smiled warmly. "Don't be like me," she said softly. "Be better." Outside the venue, the night sky stretched endlessly above her. Airplanes glided across the horizon, their lights blinking like stars. Ava watched them for a moment, her heart full. She knew the world would keep changing, slowly, imperfectly, but surely. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere up there, Another young woman would look at a plane and think, if she can build one, maybe I can too. Because sometimes one act of grace doesn't just change a moment, it changes the world.